The same thing happened now. His fear, his shame, his love. All his arguments were not altered in the least. The thing was neither more nor less dreadful than it had been before. The only difference was that he knew, almost as a historical proposition, that it was going to be done. He might beg, weep, or rebel, might curse or adore, sing like a martyr, or blaspheme like a devil. It made not the slightest difference. The thing was going to be done. There was going to arrive, in the course of time, a moment at which he would have done it. The future act stood there, fixed and unaltered, as if he had already performed it. It was a mere irrelevant detail that it happened to occupy the position we call future, instead of that which we call past. The whole struggle was over, and yet there seemed to have been no moment of victory. You might say, if you liked, that the power of choice had been simply set aside and an inflexible destiny substituted for it. On the other hand, you might say that he had delivered from the rhetoric of his passions and had emerged into unassailable freedom. Ransom could not, for the life of him, see any difference between these two statements. Predestination and freedom were apparently identical. He could no longer see any meaning in the many arguments he had heard on this subject. No sooner had he discovered that he would certainly try to kill the unman tomorrow than the doing of it appeared to him a smaller matter than he supposed. He could hardly remember why he had accused himself of megalomania when the idea first occurred to him. It was true that if he left it undone, Maldil himself would do some greater thing instead. In that sense he stood for Maldil, but no more for Eve would have stood for him, by simply not eating the apple, or than any man stands for him in doing any good action, as there was no comparison in person. So there was none in suffering, or only such comparison as may be between a man who burns his finger putting out a spark and a fireman who loses his life in fighting a conflagration because that spark was not put out. He asked no longer, "Why me?" It might as well be he as another. It might as well be any other choice as this. The fierce light which he had seen resting on this moment of decision rested in reality on all. "I have cast your enemy into sleep," said the voice. "He will not wake till morning. Get up, walk 20 paces back into the wood. There sleep. Your sister sleeps also." When some dreaded morning comes, we usually wake fully to it at once. Ransom passed with no intermediate stages from dreamless sleep to a full consciousness of his task. He found himself alone, the island gently rocking on a sea that was neither calm nor stormy. The golden light glinting through indigo trunks of trees told him in which direction the water lay. He went to it and bathed. Then, having landed again, he lay down and drank. He stood for a few minutes, running his hands through his wet hair and stroking his limbs. Looking down at his own body, he noticed how gently the sunburn on one side of the pallor on the other had decreased. He would hardly be christened piebald if the lady were now to meet him for the first time. His color had become more like ivory, and his toes, after so many days of nakedness, had begun to lose the cramped, squalid shape imposed by boots. Altogether, he thought better of himself as a human animal than he had done before. He felt pretty certain that he would never again wield an unmaimed body until a greater morning came for the whole universe, and he was glad that the instrument had been thus tuned up to concert pitch before he had to surrender it. When I wake up after thy image, I shall be satisfied, he said to himself. Presently he walked into the woods. Accidentally, for he was at the moment intent on food, he blundered through a whole cloud of the arboreal bubbles. The pleasure was as sharp as when he had first experienced it, and his very stride was different as he emerged from them. Although this was to be his last meal, he did not even now feel it proper to look for any favorite fruit. But what met him was gourds. A good breakfast on the morning you are hanged, he thought whimsically, as he let the empty shell drop from his hand. Filled for the moment with such pleasure as seemed to make the whole world a dance. All said and done, he thought. It's been worth it. I've had a time. I've lived in paradise. He went a little farther in the wood, which grew thickly. Hereabout, and almost tripped over the sleeping form of the lady. It was unusual for her to be sleeping at this time of the day, and he assumed it was Maldil's doing. I shall never see her again, he thought, and then I shall never again look on a female body in quite the same way as I look on this. As he stood looking down on her, what was most with him was an intense and orphaned longing that he might, if only for once, have seen the great mother of his own race thus in her innocence and splendor. Other things, other blessings, other glories, he murmured, but never that. Never in all worlds that. God can make good use of all that happens, but the loss is real. He looked at her once again, and then walked abruptly past the place where she lay. I was right, he thought. It couldn't have gone on. It was time to stop it. It took him a long time, wandering like this, in and out of the dark yet colored thickets, before he found his enemy. He came on his old friend the dragon, just as he had first seen it, coiled about the trunk of a tree, but it also was asleep, and now he noticed that ever since he awoke he had perceived no chattering of birds, no rustling of sleek bodies or peering of brown eyes through the leafage, nor heard any noise but that of water. It seemed that the Lord God had cast the whole island, or perhaps that whole world, into deep sleep. For a moment this gave him a sense of desolation, but almost at once he rejoiced that no memory of blood and rage should be left imprinted in these happy minds. After about an hour, suddenly rounding a little clump of bubble trees, he found himself face to face with the unman. Is it wounded already, he thought, as the first vision of a blood-stained chest broke on him. Then he saw that of course it was not its own blood. A bird already half plucked and with beak wide open in the soundless yell of strangulation was feebly struggling in its long, clever hands. Ransom found himself acting before he knew what he had done. Some memory of boxing at his preparatory school must have awaked, for he found he had delivered a straight left with all his might on the unman's jaw. But he had forgotten that he was not fighting with gloves. What recalled him to himself was the pain as his fist crashed against the jawbone. It seemed almost to have broken his knuckles, and the sickening jar all up his arm.